Most people, even if they're not Christian, and even if they've never read the Bible, they know the term Good Samaritan. It's just a term that has become part of our vernacular. Everybody knows it. And when we call somebody a Good Samaritan, we mean that they've done some act of selfless service for someone. So for us today, the term Samaritan is a very positive word. But that was not the case in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, the word Samaritan was a very negative word. Samaritans were people who were second-class citizens. They were people who were scorned, who were rejected. They were people who were on the fringes of society. Jesus and all of the other devout Jewish people of his day were forbidden by their religion from associating with Samaritans. Samaritans were not allowed to step foot inside a Jewish household, and they certainly couldn't step foot inside the temple. Samaritans were people who were considered impure and unclean. And the reason for that is that Samaritans were the product of intermarriage between Jews and Gentiles. And this went against the Jewish religious law and the purity codes. We spoke about them a few Sundays ago. So in Jesus' day, to call someone a Good Samaritan would have been an oxymoron. For there's no way the people could have wrapped their mind that a Samaritan could be good. So Jesus' story today is brilliant because he has a Samaritan help the dying man, where a priest and the Levite just pass him by. Now, you may not be familiar with the term Levite. The best way to explain it is it's like a deacon in the Christian church. It's kind of like the person who assists the priest in the ceremonial duties in the temple. So the priest and the Levite are two of the most holy and righteous people. And yet they pass by the dying man. And the reason that they do so is because the dying man is bleeding. And it would be considered unclean for them as religious men to touch that man. That's what was written in the book of Leviticus, in these purity codes. The priest and the Levite think that by following these laws, they are obeying God. But Jesus, with this story, flips that around. Jesus is saying, you don't follow God by following the letter of the law that's written in a book. You follow God by loving like God, by showing compassion, by your actions. We spoke a few Sundays ago about how we at WCC want to say that we're spiritually active. That it's not about just reading from a book, but that we are actually showing love and compassion and being God in the world. Now, the best way for us to kind of make sense of this story in our world today is, instead of it being a priest and a Levite, think about this story taking place in 2016 in America, and the priest is a conservative Christian leader, and the Levite is an evangelical megachurch pastor, and they pass by someone who's dying. But the person who helps, the Good Samaritan, is a Syrian refugee, or is a homeless transgender person of color, or is an undocumented immigrant, or is a Muslim from a foreign country. That's how powerful it was. That's what Jesus was trying to say in his day. was to take the group of people who most people consider the other Most people today consider those groups of people the other. Most American Christians consider those people to be the ones who are sinful and the ones who are unsaved. And Jesus, in this very powerful teaching, says, the person that you thought was bad actually did what God would do. And the people that you thought were good, they were the ones who were not obeying God. That was a real shocking thing to say. But notice Jesus is such a brilliant teacher that he doesn't actually come out and say those words. The lawyer is trying to test him. Now, the lawyer wasn't like an attorney today. What the lawyer meant is that this is a person who understood Jewish law, was an expert in Jewish law. So he's trying to test Jesus. But notice, Jesus doesn't answer him directly. Jesus has the lawyer draw his own conclusion. Jesus was such a brilliant teacher. All he does is tell a story. And then he says to the lawyer, so, of those three men, which one was the one who showed this man that he was his neighbor? And the lawyer has to admit that it was the Samaritan. And Jesus says, well then, go and do likewise. He was basically saying to the lawyer in front of all of these Jewish people, go and do like the Samaritan. That would be like standing in an evangelical megachurch and saying from the stage, now go and be like a transgender person. Go and do like the Muslim. People would be shocked. But that's what Jesus was all about. Even though Jesus was a devout Jew, he was against these purity codes. He kept over and over again saying to the religious people of his time, stop focusing on these rules that are written in a book and start showing the love of God to people, all people. Jesus was trying to dissolve all of those barriers because those codes were dividing people. Many of you know the name Marcus Borg. Marcus Borg was one of the founding fathers of the progressive Christian movement. He died 2 years ago. He wrote many wonderful books, but one of them is called Seeing Jesus for the First Time. And in that book, Marcus Borg says this: one of the hallmarks of Jesus' teachings was his pointed attacks on the purity system. This was a dominant theme in the Jewish social world during this time. And it focused on creating a world with sharp social boundaries between who was pure and who was impure, who was righteous and who was a sinner, between the whole and the not whole, between male and female, between rich and poor, between Jew and Gentile. Jesus deliberately replaces the core value of purity with love and compassion. That to me says perfectly what Jesus was about. He was saying, you and your religion, our religion, following the laws in this book, we divided people into saying, you're pure, you're impure. You're saved, you're a sinner. And Jesus is saying we have to dissolve that so you can understand why Jesus got in so much trouble. Because he was saying things that the religious people of his time took issue with. If we call ourselves Christians, meaning that we are following the way of Jesus, we have to be people who, like him, are working to dissolve the boundaries, the groups that our world wants to put people in. And what we have to do is do what Jesus did. Do what the Good Samaritan did. Show love and compassion to all people. I loved in the words of integration this morning what Martin Luther King had to say about the Good Samaritan story. He said, when the priest and the Levites saw the dying man, they thought, well, if I help this man, what's going to happen to me? The Samaritan didn't think about that. The Samaritan thought, if I don't help this man, what's going to happen to him? That's how you know when you're growing spiritually. When you start to think about the other before yourself. Most people, we spoke a few weeks ago, are still in what Richard Rohr says are in the first half of life, where it's all about me and my family. That's how they live. That's what all their thoughts are about. That's what their whole day is about, me and my family. And when they go into the voting booth, they think the same thing. How is this person going to benefit me and my family? But when you grow spiritually, when you're in the second half of life, you begin to think about the other. And when you walk into the voting booth and you think about a policy, you're not just thinking about how it's going to benefit you and your family, but how it's going to benefit your neighbor. And who is your neighbor? That was the question. The lawyer says, he's trying to test Jesus, well, isn't my neighbor just the people who live around me? I mean, isn't my neighbor just the people of my tribe, the people in my group, the people of my religion, the people who believe what I believe? And Jesus gives the example. The Samaritan couldn't have been different. And yet he was the one who was the good neighbor. So Jesus gave us just 2 commandments. It's almost like he was saying those 10 commandments that were from your ancestors, you don't need all those. You only need 2. He said, I'm just giving you 2. Love God and your neighbor as yourself. That's it. But the secret about those 2 commandments is that it's really just one commandment. When you love your neighbor, you are loving God. If you want to know God, go and love like God. Show love to your neighbor. Show compassion and mercy. That's how you will know God. So, who is your neighbor? Well, I think the parable tells us. It's anyone on your daily journey who happens to come in your path. All of us, on a daily basis, when we go about our day, we come across lots of people. Many of them are strangers to us, and many of them are very different from us. But they've come into our path that day. And our job, our duty, is to show them love and compassion. You don't have to do something great like help a dying person and pay for them to stay at an inn. That's wonderful. But it can just be looking at someone with the eyes of love and compassion. A few years ago, someone gave me a card that I keep in my wallet. And oftentimes when I'm in the grocery store or the airport, I try to remember what's on this card. It is called a compassion exercise. And it says, the objective is to increase the amount of compassion in the world. And here are the instructions. This exercise can be done wherever people congregate, in airports, malls, parks, or beaches. And it should be done on strangers unobtrusively. And here's what you do. You look at the person in the grocery store, and with attention on the person, you say silently to yourselves, just like me, this person is seeking happiness in their life. Just like me, this person is trying to avoid suffering in their life. Just like me, this person has known sadness, loneliness, and despair. Just like me, this person is seeking to fulfill a higher need. And just like me, this person is learning about life. That's how you can show compassion and mercy in the world. Of course, we want to go out and do great acts, but doing that, just looking at people and seeing them the way God sees them, and sending those thoughts of love and compassion to them, that has such great power. Then we stop looking at other people as the other, and we start seeing them as one, as us, seeing them the way God sees them. And so what I would like to invite you to do this week is I would like to invite you to start your day getting up in the morning and saying to God, God, here I am. Today, whoever comes in my path, may I be an instrument of your love, compassion, and mercy to that person. And then watch what happens with your day. You will be so much more attentive to that person in the grocery store or the person that you just happen to casually meet, knowing that God has put them in your path so that you can be the good Samaritan to them. We heard in our words of integration this morning, we are here to do what Jesus did. Jesus became like God, and we are here to become like God. And the best way that we do that is by loving like God loves, and looking at people the way God looks at them, unconditionally and with great love and compassion. So, as Jesus told the lawyer, let us go forth and do likewise. Namaste.